This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome everybody to the West Basin Municipal Water District's Engineering and Operations Committee meeting and special meeting of the Board of Directors. Today is Thursday, July 15th. First is the determination of a quorum, and I think we have one. Our other committee members present and our alternates also present, as well as Director Deere from the board. Any public comments?
Chairman Alvarez, we have not yet received any requests for public comment, but we would ask that if anybody is on the line that would like to comment, please do so now.
It looks like we have someone on the line. It's Bob Boca.
No, I'm just watching. Good to see you, Desi.
It looks like you might have wanted to talk. How you doing, Bob? Okay, then any presentations today?
No presentations today.
And the action calendar, no action items?
Correct, no action items.
So then we move on to the information calendar, and if we can have the first item. So that's the water facility operations update.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman Alvarez. We do have our normal water facility operations update for you today. That will be provided by Susanna Lee, our Senior Operations Engineer, Uzi Daniel, our Manager of Operations, as well as Frank Fuchs, our Operations Supervisor. However, as most of you know, there was a spill over at Hyperion, and we'd like to provide a brief update to the committee and board on that issue today. And for that, we have our Executive Manager of Engineering and Operations, Barkov Mazurlian, here for that update.
Okay.
Thank you, EJ, and good afternoon again, board members. Yes, as many of you know, are aware of the sewage spill event that occurred over the Sunday, Monday earlier this week, following the sewage spill at the City of LA's Hyperion treatment facility. West Basin has been receiving what we could definitely call subgrade influent water quality for 4 straight days now. As many of you know, and as you will see from the graph on page number 17, in our monthly operations updates, we look at turbidity as a measure of the water quality that we receive, the source water quality that we receive from the City of LA, and that is the source of our entire recycled water program. Turbidity is basically that cloudiness, that haziness in the fluid that's caused by a large number of small solid particles, and turbidity is measured by nephelometric turbidity units or NTUs. The influent water NTU that we received, it typically range between 10 and 20, and we are required by our permit to bring that down to 2 before it leaves the plant. Sometimes, as you can see from the graph, and maybe we can bring it up here, the operations update presentation as well. Oh, there it is. You can see that at times we see spikes in the turbidity level. There's upsets at the Hyperion treatment plant, and our operations team tries to mitigate those impacts and deal with the consequences of them. And they're really troublesome when they do happen. So we see these spikes. They can go up to like 40 and 50 NTUs. For the past 4 days, the turbidity levels are in the range between 50 and 90. And in our discussions with the city, it looks like That's going to continue for maybe 2 to 3 weeks. What does this mean to us? How does this impact us? Well, in the first 24 to 48 hours, we started reducing barrier because, again, to meet compliance, we started reducing the advanced treated water that we produce for the barrier system. We went down to 2.2 million gallons per day. And then as of this morning, we had to shut down barrier. Barrier right now is completely unpotable. Elsewhere, the Title 22 system, again, that water that goes to our irrigation customers and feeds into our satellite plants, we had to, again, to meet compliance, we had to reduce or slow down the water produced from our filters, and then supplement potable water into our product water tanks at ECL. We also reached out to our refinery customers earlier in the week, started talking to them about potential impacts to them. Marathon, as of now, we were able to reduce the production to Marathon by 10%. They're going to switch that 10% over to one of their wells. They were pulling maximum amount from us, and it was prudent for us after the discussions to reduce that. We didn't have to reduce from the Torrance satellite plant because the demands are low already. They're going through through their turnaround, their heavy maintenance period, and so the demands are low to begin with. And so we didn't have to reduce them further. If those demands pick up in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we might need to supplement the boiler feed with potable. Chevron, no cutbacks on Chevron supply yet because the microfiltration processes at ECL are a little bit different technology microfiltration than the satellite plants, newer, more robust. We haven't seen the need to cut back on that supply yet. Nitrified water, no need to cut back on supply on that, but if we continue to see iron levels rise in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we may have to supplement potable on those as well. So as you can see, there's several impacts. Cost-wise, what does it mean for us cost-wise? Well, there's with cutbacks, there's reduction in sales. The cost of potable water, obviously, that we use to supplement. The cost of increased amounts of chemicals that we would use to meet compliance and to as part of the cleaning processes of the membrane, we have to clean more often. Costs associated with solids handling. More solids are generated with such water quality, and therefore more solids we have to haul them off more often. And then there was, while our equipment at the Hyperion, we have 2 pump stations, an older one and a newer one at the Hyperion treatment facility. None of them got flooded. But there was an instance where the channel that leads to the outfall got backed up, and what it did, it backed up into our newer pump station, which is below grade, and raised the levels to a point where it went past the grates and it damaged some of our level transmitters, some electrical equipment that indicate the level of the water inside, and we are in the process of replacing those. It didn't overflow to a point where it was above ground or damage anything like pumps or motors on our end, but just some pieces of equipment that need to be changed. So I commend the efforts of our operations team in dealing with the situation, and we will continue to do whatever is necessary to mitigate the impacts of the highly turbid water that we are receiving. We are in contact with LA Sand. They've going to keep us posted on how they're doing with installing some bypass systems over there. And before I hand it over to Susanna for the rest of the operations update, I'll pause a little bit here to see if any directors have any questions about the event.
So are there any questions?
This is Director Houston, real quick, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Barkev, for that update. Just real quick question. So I heard you say, what, 2 to 3 weeks before they expect the turbidity levels to be back to some sort of normalcy, and then you mentioned something about installing some, what was that, new equipment or whatever. I mean, can you give us any more detail at all? So, what is it that they're fixing or trying to replace that's going to take approximately 2 to 3 weeks?
Yeah, the information that we've received is that what happened there is that their headworks, that they have their bar screens, basically the first line of defense at their water treatment facility got a lot of debris, and so their systems backed up. There was some sort of an overflow that damaged particular pumps and motors in certain areas of the plant. And we don't know all the details, but those pumps and motors that got damaged, they need to be maybe replaced, and those type of things require a lot of there's a lot of lead time for pumps and motors. So what they're doing, what our understanding is that they're putting in bypass pumps and motors ones to let the treatment process continue. And so I guess you could describe that perhaps their treatment processes are maybe overloaded, and so that relates to the water quality that we are receiving.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And just a quick question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
You probably already talked about this, but who covers the cost of these kinds of problems?
We, contractually, whatever water basically the city of LA produces and sends towards the outfall, that's the water that we agreed to kind of pull on our end. So we've historically and traditionally had to kind of deal with whatever water we are receiving from that secondary effluent that they produce. So I could say that there hasn't been an instance where we've gone back to the city of LA to cover any particular costs related to water quality.
Thank you.
On that point, Barkev, basically, and this is a question, but our contract or agreement with the city of LA effectively says we will take the water at whatever water quality they deliver it.
Mhm.
Right. In the latest amendments to the contract, there was some provisions put in there related to water quality that gives us some leeway as it comes to the barrier, but not necessarily to recover costs, but for them to implement certain measures that would help us with our barrier system. But nothing to say that we would, if something were to happen, we would go back and recover costs from the city.
Because, typically, as you got up on the screen, and what we see every month is we have some high variability during periods of time with the influent that's coming from Hyperion. And it seems like we just accept it because we don't have much of a choice.
Correct.
Before we move on, I would like to make a request. When in the next couple of 3-4 weeks and this is all over, I'm sure that you guys, since you talked about it already, are tracking all the costs and all the impacts. I would like a report that details exactly how we responded to this and how it affected the operations, and particularly a definition of all of the costs and what they were attributable to, including lost sales, because that's a cost to the district.
Okay.
Okay,
And,
anybody else have any questions? Go ahead,
Yeah.
Director.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. One last question, actually following up on both of what you and Director Williams asked. Knowing that we do accept basically what we get from them, but when we have something like this that's kind of beyond the ordinary or what have you, and maybe this is something you can address later, but are there options to, I mean, do we have any kind of insurance coverage or some other things that should certain, malfunctions happen to our equipment that we do get some reimbursement for? I have no idea at this moment, but I'm just saying maybe that should be something that you can inform the board as well.
Okay. Well, I'll double check. I don't believe we have coverage that relates specifically to adverse water quality type of event, but that's something that we could double check on.
Okay. Just because when you're, oh, thank you. Because when you're talking about, for example, that level of water rising in the pump house and, things like that. I mean, again, these being, it sounds like it was supposedly potentially catastrophic that, I have no clue if there are options where if equipment got damaged or if we had to incur extra expenses that while we can't get it back from the state of Los Angeles, I mean, do we have any other coverage that at least would protect us somewhat, especially when you put in so much expensive brand new equipment. So just a question. You don't have to answer now, but I'd like to, any input you guys can provide us at some point would be good as well.
Okay.
Okay, if there's no other questions, then let's move on with the rest of the update.
So I'll turn it over to, again, Senior Operations Engineer, Susanna Lee, for the remainder of the presentation. Susanna?
Okay, do I need to, okay, let me bring it up. Okay, thank you, EJ and Barkev, and good afternoon, members of the board. Let's continue with the presentations that we see on the screen. This is slide 2. I think we discussed the influent water quality enough, but what I want to add is that our normal average influent water quality is at 12 normally. So anything above this, as you can see, like this, for the good part of June, we were already seeing a lot of challenging water quality, and that had affected our barrier production last 2 months. So what Barkev mentioned, that 50 to 90 MTU water really is not sustainable for our membrane system. Also, our disinfected torsion system is really loaded with a lot of solids, and therefore forcing us to really need to blend down, so then it won't incur additional damage to the disinfected tertiary system equipment. So moving on to the next slide, slide 3, page 18 on your packet. This is on the water recycle water production for the month of May and June. As the graph show that the refinery productions were up compared to fiscal year 19-20, ranging from 6 to 74% higher to last fiscal year, with clearly the exception of barrier, and which was down 37 to 50% compared to fiscal year 19-20 for those 2 months. The main factors, as we kind of talked about briefly, there are a few reasons. So for the month of May, it was partly due to the county continuing work on their well maintenance work. And then the second major issue reason was the power shutdown in May, towards the end of May. For June, the reason why we were down 50% in barrier production, one of the main reasons was the chemical shortage that I'll be discussing later on for the month of June, and we're still experiencing this chemical shortage. But the other reason is the water quality that we receive from Hyperion. So it forced us to reduce in our production. But overall, though, for the end of fiscal year 2021, our production ended at 34,452 acre-feet, which is about 4.5% below our original budgeted amount of 36,160 acre-feet. But compared to fiscal year 1920, we were just down 1%. So with that, I will go to next page. Here on page 19 of slide 4 of the presentation, here's some highlights of the maintenance work that happened in June. On the left, the group of photos is showing that all the replacement work as a result of the shutdown in May. This replacement work was for one of the main breakers that supply powers to the Chevron processes. Shutdown was required during that replacement work, and the operations staff took opportunities to perform a couple other major maintenance activities that are shown on the top right. So included replacing some leaking auto strainer valve for phase 5, and also isolation valve for cartridge filter. Finally, on the bottom is showing some photos of membrane replacement for one of the Chevron RO low pressure trains. Moving on to slide 5, page 20 of your packet. Here's a special topic for the month. I'll be talking about chemicals. As we just heard from Barkav, we really rely on chemicals to help to bring our recycled water system to success. So annually, the chemicals that we use for the recycled water program totals between $6.5 to $8 million, and this totals to 18 to 20% of the recycled water budget. And the chemical agreements that were approved by the board a couple of months ago just began in effect a week ago. And as I mentioned, chemicals play one of the most important roles in helping to meet various water quality. So this ranges from pre-treatment and using Eric to enable us to meet the permit requirement, and then to treatment processes such as sulfuric acid to help us to lower pH set point for our membranes, and to finally polishing step as chlorine for disinfection purposes. Because of the importance of these commodities, the success of to the success of a recycled water program, the ability to secure stable source of chemical is very important. And the pandemic last year just brought out the vulnerability of the supply chain of chemical to us, and we were met with 3 events. So the first event was toward the end of 2020, and it was due to the increase of oxygen demand during the peak of pandemic. Both the oxygens and carbon dioxide supplies were affected during that time. One, because oxygens were highly in demand for medical purpose, and because there's less oxygens left in the production, so there was less oxygen to use for producing carbon dioxide. We were also hit with surcharges because of that, and also we had to stop ozonation process for a couple of months. The second event was earlier this year, January, February, due to the Southwest winter freeze that had affected the chemical raw material supplies. And our ferric chloride vendor notified us that we may have potential supply issues and surcharges to come. And finally, as I just mentioned, that we are currently under chlorine supply constraint right now. This is due to one of the main chlor-alkali production plants at the western region of the US. They were met. They were impacted by a major electrical system failure and resulted in a widespread supply shortage for chlorine, hydrochloric acid, and caustic soda. So as a result, our vendor has placed a delivery restriction on chlorine for our plants because priority is given to the potable water facilities. West Basin, together with Suez, we were able to secure a secondary source, even though at a higher unit price, to help us to get additional loads of chlorine. But as such, though, we did have to reduce barrier production for a good part of June, and it was kept at 4 to 5 MGD for month of June for barrier. Going forward, West Basin is looking into working together with other agency, AWWA, EPA, to develop solutions to provide a more reliable chemical supply, and we'll update the board as that develops. And lastly, I just want to mention about some upcoming studies related to chemical. First is the
Susanna, if I could interrupt you for a second before you move to the upcoming studies. So
Sure.
bottom line is, I know about the chlorine shortage, but is it going to impact us where you're really going to have to reduce production, or you've managed to work around it?
We have to reduce, but your question is, do we have to reduce?
The question is it really, how big an impact is it to West Basin's operations?
We have to reduce from 9 MGD to 4 to 5 MGD for the month of June. So because we were restricted for a delivery of 70,000 gallons of chlorine per day. And we normally need to use, that I don't know, I think we need to use more like 5,000 just at ECL. For total, I need to recalculate how much that is for daily. But because of that, we cannot reduce on a Title 22. We had to sacrifice barrier in that case to ensure that we have enough chlorine for Title 22 and our satellite facilities.
Okay, so did I hear you you said it basically reduced production from 9 MGD to about 5. Did you say something like that?
Yes, and that's for Director, hello, this is Uzi. That is correct. We had to do that for barrier because also with Title 22, we have a very specific permit limit of chlorine contact time. So we were able to reduce barrier, especially since they're doing work on the barrier system. And we were able to save chlorine on that end and continue everything else normal.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. So going back to the upcoming chemical studies, one of the study that I would like to bring up is the anti-scaling study. This is a proprietary chemical that is important to the success of our membrane and operations. So this chemical is used to prevent scaling to membranes. And due to the proprietary nature and the challenging water quality, we require a 60 to 90 days testing period for this chemical. So we have the RFP ready and we'll be sending that out in next week. And as part of the supply stability effort, we will also be looking into a different procurement approach where we'll be looking to pre-qualify several anti-scaling that can use for our application. So in the future, we'll have more flexibility if one of the anti-scaling vendor does not have chemical available, then we'll be able to go to another vendor. The second and third chemical studies are ozone testing as well as barrier chlorine residual optimization study. These studies are part of the chemical optimization efforts from Suez, and will be, the ozone testing has already begun, but we'll be coordinating the barrier chlorine residual effort with the county, and we're looking at finishing the test plan by August, and we'll begin shortly after that. And if there's no questions, and I will hand it over to Uzi to talk about the chemistry analysis.
Great, thank you, Susanna, and good afternoon, directors. I will real quick let everyone know this has been an interesting journey, and we're not alone. A lot of public water agencies, as you can tell, had the same supply issues. The EPA, as Susanna mentioned, a lot of the water groups are working on this, and how we do public procurement will also play into this, and that's why we're also using examples from other districts, other cities, and you'll see us start to include language, including for our upcoming lab contract, that says we may choose more than one. What we realized during the supply chain issues is, of course, with established customers, they will do their best to supply you. But often when we would reach out to other vendors, they would say, we're not taking any new customers right now. Our duty is to supply to those we have a contract with, understandably. Where we benefited is having a multinational regional operator, Suez, who has a far reach. We were able oftentimes to literally go out and secure some last minute supplies if we needed them. So that was helpful. But I think the way that water districts and cities do business procurement in relation to supply chain, we may see that change, and I think that'll be a positive change. You know, we have to make lemonade out of these lemons of this past year. So I wanted to state that quickly, and it does play into the chemistry analysis. I know we were asked about our RFP that's going to go out for our chemical contracts. So I get way too excited to give an update on compliance and sampling related to that. Happy to ask questions. Again, West Basin should be very proud that we produce so many different types of water. And let me tell you, I'm here today. The operators are out here thinking on their feet, readjusting, literally meeting hourly to think of ways and strategize to make sure we can continue our supply and make sure it's compliant. And the reason some of these things are a little complicated is because we do have overlapping systems. So being able to separate those out takes some thought. Those are regulated through our many permits. As you can see here, we have 8 what we call extensive permits. Those are permits, some of them literally can be dozens or hundreds of pages long, and a lot of monitoring reporting programs, or MRPs as we call them. A lot of those dictate what we have to look for. A question we often get is, why do we have to look for all these things? Especially when folks are in the wastewater or the water industry and say, well, we don't have to look for these. Well, I will tell you, being on the forefront, as we proudly are, in indirect potable reuse and even moving forward towards direct potable reuse, a lot of these constituents of emerging concern, a lot of these different things that we're all looking for are a result of regulators really preparing us for what DPR would look like, and also making sure that we can defend later to the public when we want to go to a more assertive, let's say, approach to reusing water on a potable level. We're able to say to the public, we've been doing this for 20 years. This isn't new. We have 20 years worth of data. So it's a little tough now for us to think it's overwhelming everything that we do analyze for, but we're really demonstrating for the long haul. And I think that'll pay off for West Basin and the Southern California and the whole West in general. There aren't a lot of agencies who do what we do. There's very few, and that also means it limits the labs who are certified to do that work. For example, the chemicals of emerging concern, and now more relevant, the bioanalytical work. We have attached to this board packet in attachment C, which I believe is on page 12 of the packet if you want to look over that later. We've shown you how the scope would look, and you'll see something in there on bioanalytics. There literally aren't any folks doing that work. It's very research-based, and yet it's required now per the new recycled water programs, and it is even written into our new monitoring and reporting program that was recently issued to us. What complicates matters, and I know we have some of people I worked with for many years in the drinking water industry, we also have the issue of ELAP and laboratory certification. Those regulations and requirements changed a few years ago. There are literally some lawsuits challenging that. It has made things very challenging. The intent is to guarantee quality assurance. Unfortunately, like some of these, what is happening is it's starting to have a lot of the smaller labs drop out of the business. It's too costly. They can't afford all the extra staff. So it is a little challenging when West Basin, Orange County Water District, WRD, Santa Clara, Inland Empire, LA County San, when they go to look for chemistry labs, there's only a few who do this work. And not only that, it also makes it challenging because you can imagine there ends up being a backload and getting samples back on time. It's very challenging for the labs. So through this RFP, we really try to make it as available as possible. We reach out to every lab through ELAP that we see is certified to be able to do drinking water, wastewater methods. We allow them with quality assurance to get subcontractors so that they could subcontract certain work out if they don't do it in-house. And we do everything we can to make sure, because we want to see not only competition, but we want to make sure that we're getting quality labs, because a lab's failure or loss of certification can actually result in compliance issues, as we can all imagine for us. So not to bore us too much more, but I will let us know proudly that we do have to analyze for approximately 35,000 samples a year from all our recycled water permits. Nearly 30,000 of those are done internally in our lab. There are 6 full-time staff members to do that compliance and process control work. In comparison, Orange County Water District's lab, MODOC, they have a combined lab. They have 22 staff, and they do not have the number of permits we have. That's why we rely on these contract labs, one for microbiology and the other one that will be going out next week that is called chemistry and includes a lot of these CECs. Next slide, please. I'll continue here with our environmental compliance activities for June. It was a lighter month, and next month, always during quarterly reports, you'll see a lot more. So we got our log reduction reports out. We had no issued notice of violations. We are right now answering some questions. We received notice of an exceedance of oil and grease on our brine from regulators, and we're working with them right now. And we'll have an update next month for the board if there is a result of that. Next slide, please. Also, I'd like to touch on to be very, again, proud of the service we do. We really, and I'll thank Frank for this as we transition, but we really do try to reach out to our customers, our purveyors. One interesting thing that's occurring, MWD is switching to mostly Colorado River water. That has required us to meet with a number of our purveyors as they switch sources, switch connections, even reverse flow of the water within this giant distribution system, particularly related into Culver City, Marina Del Rey, affecting the county and others. It's done with careful precision, lots of meetings, but it does require a lot of attention and communication. And we're very proud to serve our customers, and you can see a number of those projects on here as well. In addition, our Title 22 purveyor program, our courtesy pass-through program, we did sampling for their wells this last month, Q2 sampling. UCMR will be coming up soon. And lastly, the Brewer desalter has been down and offline, although we are repairing a leak in the well, and we should have it back up hopefully by the end of this month. So you'll see some better numbers for the following month. And with that, if there are no questions, I'll ask Frank to transition with the next slide, please.
Thank you, Uzi. Good afternoon, directors. If you can please refer to page 24 of your board packet. And yeah, so this is our a monthly update of our recycled water distribution maintenance activities. And these are activities that were implemented by California Water Service Company for the month of June. And so Cal Water provided maintenance support, but they also provided support for the transition of our new distribution contractor, Infomark, that started July 1st. Infomark is now implementing these O&M activities. And you can see, I also just want to highlight that Cal Water has been very helpful during the transition with the support that they provided. The photos that you see there below are some of the maintenance activities related to air vacuum valves that needed to be repaired and maintained. And in the corner there, there's a photograph of a meeting that we had between West Basin staff, Infomark, and a Cal Water operator that was there to provide feedback regarding some of the maintenance and just answer general questions to help with the transition. And I also wanted to mention before we go on to the next slide that we have notified the cities and purveyors that Infomark is now implementing the West Basin distribution O&M along with the new emergency contact information. And in addition, we will be scheduling meetings with our purveyors and cities just to introduce Infomark staff directly, just to ensure that they have the correct contact information. Next slide, please. So this is page 25 of the board packet. And this is for the Dominguez Channel bike path in Hawthorne. This is a new recycled water site that was connected in May. And this was just, these are just some photographs of the final walkthrough that was conducted this past month, just to complete some of the final remaining items, including some signage that was required during the final cross connection test. There was a ribbon cutting ceremony that was initially scheduled for later this month, but unfortunately that has been postponed. We don't have the new date, and we'll make sure to keep the board updated of that. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is page 26 of the board packet, and this is for the LA Stadium development. We've been working at this development for some time now. A large portion of the development has already been using recycled water for irrigation purposes, which includes the stadium, irrigation. The lake is also connected, the parking lots and parkways. The lake still, they're working on their pre-treatment system, so they still haven't been utilizing recycled water for the lake, but they anticipate that they will be using that in the upcoming months. And this specific site is for the Hollywood Park retail phase that's located at the corner of Prairie and Century. And so these are some photographs of the irrigation system that was recently installed and inspected by West Basin staff along with the Department of Public Health inspector. And it's anticipated that this specific site will be connected in April of next year. The next slide, please. This is page 27 of your board packet, and this is for Topgolf, and we've labeled it a modification. And we label sites that have been connected to recycled water, but implement any modifications or changes as a modification because they are still required to go through the Department of Public Health approval process. We want to ensure that any modifications or new pipes that are installed number one, are labeled properly. They have appropriate separation. Of course, that they don't have any interconnections because cross connections, of course, are not allowed. And we also want to make sure that there's appropriate backflow protection on the potable water system. The irrigation system for this site is anticipated to be completed late August or early September. And staff is, as I mentioned, working with the Department of Public Health to get approval for the irrigation system. The entire site is anticipated to be opened early next year, but the irrigation system will be completed, we anticipate, before that, so they can start ensuring that it's ready for next year. Also want to mention that next month we will provide an update regarding a West Basin communication line that was damaged June 22nd by a contractor. Initial repairs have already been made. However, there is additional work that is in process and is currently being completed. So we'll provide a further update on that next month. And then moving on to the next slide. And this is page 28 of your board packet. And this is another recycled water site modification. This is for the Manhattan Village Shopping Center. This site was connected in January of 2019, but they have undergone several expansions, extending the recycled water irrigation system throughout the shopping center. And so this is again just an expansion of that original irrigation system, and they're anticipated to finalize the expansion by October of this year. And so again, staff has been working with the Department of Public Health to conduct these inspections at the site. That concludes our report, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any question from any of the board members? Okay, seeing none. I would like to go back and talk a little bit about the chemistry RFP. So on that particular one, can we get a little bit more of a background? I know you mentioned that there's 35,000 samples taken at multiple locations, but when you say multiple locations, are they at distinct, physically different addresses? And if so, can you specify what they are? And maybe you won't have all these answers now, but that would be one of my questions.
Sure, and they actually, permit-wise, we actually have to now give the latitude, longitude. Oftentimes, we have to locate, and that is so regulators can guarantee that if you don't like how something works out over here, that you move your sample location. So they're very distinct locations. They're dictated by your permits, and they will be at each facility of ours, each treatment plant, sometimes satellites. In contrary to potable water, distribution is not regulated the same. However, we take process control monthly out there. It's a wise thing to do. Within our treatment plants, there literally are location sites for influent, post-influent, pre-MF, post-MF, pre-RO, many of those dictated, particularly when you get into advanced water treatment. That, Director, is definitely the permit that requires the most extensive monitoring, frequent monitoring, pre and post of almost every process. That's again part of their what they call HOSIP, or their critical control point. They want you to be able to know about a problem before it happens, early indication. Then with the brine permits, we have to take some of those. Those samples are also, when you get it, it's not just like a quarterly or a monthly sample. It might be an annual toxicity study. Sometimes we have to work with the sanitation districts, get a portion of their water, a portion of ours. So I could happily provide you those locations, but they are numerous, dictated by our permits, in addition to process control sampling that we do.
Yeah, I'm not interested in latitude and longitude. I understand there are multiple locations at specific sites. I would expect that you do have an awful lot of sampling locations. For example, at the Ed C. Little plant, there are multiple processes there, etc. That's not my question. I understand that. My
Sure.
question was the physical locations. In other words, you might have one location where you might have 100 sampling points, but it's on location. So I just want to know, when we say that we're taking 35,000 samples annually, how many locations are we actually sampling? Because you do have multiple samples at
Correct.
a specific location. So I don't need latitude and longitude. I'm not what I'm asking for. I understand that within any given site, there are multiple sampling points.
Correct.
Each one will have a different latitude and longitude.
Great.
Okay.
We actually have a map. We can provide a map for you. We have on a, like at ECL.
Is here are the 5, the 10, however many different sites. Each site may have one or multiple locations. I understand that.
Got it.
Okay, so of all of the testing that we're doing, what is the regular testing that you have to do on a regular basis, whether it be weekly, monthly, quarterly.
And just to clarify, Director, do you mean what types of analyte sampling that we have to do regularly?
Like, for example, if you have to do for the recycled water system, you do Title 22, okay? So, and that's limited Title 22 as opposed to the barrier. So we use Title 22 flexibly here. So all I'm asking for is how many different types of tests are we doing? Because you mentioned a lot of tests, and I understand have a requirement for doing bioanalytics and emerging contaminants type of testing. That tends to be a little more specialized area where a lot of labs that are ELAB accredited don't necessarily have that specialty. But if the amount of that testing is limited and the greater number of tests is pretty regular, maybe we might want to split this so that we have more competition on the more common type of testing that can be done by more labs, as opposed to the more specialized testing that requires a more or a laboratory with higher capabilities. So
I understand. I think I understand your
I'd like
question
to see
now.
that, because at least the draft of the RFP that I saw tended to throw everything in there, and I think it limits us in the number of water quality laboratories that are capable of doing the majority of probably the majority of the work, with the exception of the research type work where you're looking at some of the bioanalytic and emerging contaminants. And that's, give me an idea. You might not have the numbers now, but if you can come back before you guys issue this RFP as to what a breakdown of all the different testing.
Sure, and we have that in a sample plan. We can get that today. The sample plan helps show that is listed here, over 400 different analytes. And you are correct, there are a number that are, I guess we'll call more common, like you see in the drinking water world. What can complicate it for us is you can imagine a drinking water matrix doesn't work so well on the influent sample side, but it works really well on the other side. So we have to have a lab often that can perform both of those, which isn't that uncommon. I absolutely agree with you. And I might have not mentioned this, what we're trying to do in the scope and in the RFP is state, as we saw the city of Santa Monica has done and others are starting to do, that we reserve the right to issue this to a number of people. The scope, the RFPs come back with them itemizing the cost of all the samples. So we might be able to say all CECs will go to this lab, or all general mineral physical are done in-house, but let's say all VOCs, which are kind of common, could be done here. So we could split that apart to really maximize our dollars and try to figure that out for sure.
Okay, well, I didn't see that in the limited portions of the RFP scope of work that I read. And I think that would be very helpful, because there are more labs that can do a lot of the more common, what I'll call common testing, and the specialty testing that's very few labs do. And it's also be more expensive for us. So if we can have a blended number of labs as opposed to just one lab to do all of the work.
Agreed.
So if we could see those breakdowns, I think it would help to have a more competitive number of proposals received, and gives more flexibility in the awarding of different contracts to different laboratories. And overall, I think it'll save us some money. Okay, so those are my questions / requests. And so before we issue the RFP, I'd like to see it flushed out.
We'll
All
send
right.
that sample to you for sure, Director. Thank you.
Okay, so if we could move on then to the next presentation, which is the capital improvement program update.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman Alvarez. We do have a team here to present this item.
Hello, Wendell. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Director Alvarez. Good afternoon, Chairman Alvarez and members of the board. I'm here this afternoon to give you an update on the capital improvement program. I have a couple of my employees, a couple of the district's employees and engineers are here with me. But first, I'd like to start off with giving you a couple updates on some of the fast-moving project. One of the programs that we're very proud of here at the district is the project labor agreement, and for JMM Carson, we had the pre-construction kickoff meeting on July 5th. This labor agreement allows the contractor, or it specifies that the contractor has to hire local people that live within the zip codes that West Basin service. In addition to it, it has a requirement for at-risk individuals, and these are individuals that may have been incarcerated at one time, or they may have been recently homeless or out of work. So it's a win-win program that we're really quite proud of here at the district. Additionally, on the JMM Carson project, we issued a notice to proceed on July 6th, which instructs the contractors to start his work. And on July 12th of this week, we had a pre-construction meeting as a kickoff. In addition to our long-standing project that we've been trying to get, the district has been trying to get underway for a couple of years, has been the VFD replacement. We have VFDs that have been in service since the plant at ECL was built, and we had a kickoff meeting today on that project, and we were using some promising methods, again, because of shortage of microchips and shortage of trucking and issues of that issues. We've got a good strategy the team is putting together to assure that we do take a look at some of our pre-construction or supply agreements that we have, corporate supply agreements, and order these parts and devices ahead of time so that the actual construction moves right along. Additionally, we're expecting this fall for the PV pipeline drawings to be 100% early fall, so that we will be able to get this project off the ground. And we're trying to build the pipeline ahead of some local street improvements that the city of Torrance has been engineering for the last couple of years. And so we're proud that we're going to try to get out in front of that. Later this summer, we're going to be presenting some projects for the DLD building to address some long-term repairs that have been needed, that have been put on hold kind of because of the pandemic. And so we'll be coming back to this board later this summer with some details of those projects and what we hope to achieve with those projects. So if there isn't any questions, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Camille, and she's going to provide you with an update on the Chevron nitrification product water tank. So please turn to page 40 in your packet.
Thank you, Wendell. Good afternoon, Chairman Alvarez and members of the committee. Today, I'll be providing a project update on the Chevron nitrified product water tank rehabilitation project. So if you follow me along to page 41 in your packet, I will begin. So this project was first presented to the board in October 2020, and it's part of an overall steel tank rehabilitation project that looks at and assesses several of our steel tanks that are located throughout several facilities. But today I'll be providing an update specifically on the Chevron nitrified product water tank that is located at the Chevron nitrification treatment plant in the city of El Segundo, and it's at the cross streets of Illinois Street and El Segundo Boulevard. On page 42 of your packet, you will see a project description. So again, this project is an assessment of the existing tank conditions to determine whether a rehabilitation or replacement is needed in order to extend the useful life of the tank. The tank is 842,000 gallons with about 650,000 gallons of usable capacity. It's 80 foot in diameter and has a 20-foot height. It was constructed in 1994, and so it's about 27 years old. And the tank primarily stores and delivers nitrified water to Chevron's cooling towers at Chevron Refinery. On the next page, you will see a project overview. So the design engineering services is performed by AKM Consulting, and we hired them through an on-call procurement process. So the image you see is a site map that they have created, and the tank is located on the south side of the facility. So far, we have completed an external tank inspection, which occurred in September of 2020, and an internal tank inspection or dive inspection that occurred in April of this year. We've also prepared a preliminary design report. Currently, it's in the 100% version, and it has one more to go, and that is through the help of AKM Consultants. As part of that preliminary design report, they have recommended or provided considerations for whether to rehabilitate or replace the tank. So the options we've been presented is, one option is to rehabilitate the existing tank and essentially replace the roof rafters and the roof tank plates. Another option is to rehabilitate the existing tank as well as increase the height of the tank in order to increase volume or capacity, as well as add a pump station. The volume increase is due to the fact that during the summer months, Chevron Refinery goes higher than what we are contractually allowed to give them. So we wanted to look at the potential of providing increased capacity within the facility. However, after contemplating amongst ourselves with West Basin, we determined that increasing the tank height isn't feasible at the moment due to the limited capacity, or the limited space within the facility. The other option we've also considered is a full tank replacement. So if you follow me along to the following page, you will see there's photos that were taken during the external inspection, which again happened in September of 2020. On the left-hand side, you will see the conditions of the existing tank roof plates, and those were taken via an aerial inspection or a drone that occurred in October. There's also the center image that shows you the 8-inch potable water emergency fill line, and on the right-hand side, you will see the conditions of the exterior ladder, as well as the hand railing and a 36-inch access hatch. On the next page, you will see photos taken from the dive inspection, which occurred in April of 2021. The left-hand side shows you the current conditions of the 24-inch center roof vent. There's a lot of corrosion, and in the center image, you'll see the roof ceiling, and again, this was taken from the interior of the tank looking up. And the right-hand side, you'll see conditions of the tank floor, which were taken inside the tank during the dive inspection. On page 46 of your docket, you'll see the project schedule. As I mentioned before, the external tank inspection occurred in September, and due to COVID and scheduling issues, the dive inspection had to be delayed until April of 2021, and the preliminary design report is expected to be completed at the end of this month. So the next steps would be to decide the recommendation to go forward with and create the final design plans, which should be completed by December of 2021. And then the construction bid package should be ready by January of 2022. So that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Okay, does anyone have any questions? I've had a couple.
All right.
From the project schedule you put up at the beginning, you were talking that this is really an assessment of the condition of the tank. And AKM is the consultant doing the work. Correct.
Correct.
Okay, so is AKM also have the design component of this?
Yes, they're performing the design engineering services for this.
So AKM is contract is not just for an assessment and a recommendation, but it's for assessment, recommendation, and design.
Correct.
That's interesting. Kind of encourages you to make a recommendation that is going to require design of substantial modifications as opposed to maybe just terminating and having a minimum amount of work. So
Well,
is there a possibility that maybe we have a report on the findings of the condition of the tank, the options that may be available? At that time, then a decision could be made as to what would be the option, and then a separate agreement with a different consultant or the same, but go through a different selection process for design services. That might be something that might be worth looking at.
sure. Of course, Director Alvarez, that's possible, and we've done that in the past at times where do an assessment. Maybe sometimes we'll just stop at preliminary design and go out to bid again for final design. And sometimes we'll just do the assessment and then another RFP for the preliminary design and then another RFP for the final design. Each of these steps would take longer, would add time to it basically. And in this particular case, to make it a little bit more streamlined, we kind of combined it, knowing of course any recommendation that the design engineer would make would have to we'll have to test it, we'll have to discuss it, we decide whether we want to go with their recommendation or not, and we obviously will review the inspection reports, we review the PDRs, and in this particular case the recommendation is not to do a full replacement from ACAM. So it's leaning towards just doing the minimum amount of roof replacement. So so in which case we would move forward with such a design.
Okay, so maybe we can, since the preliminary design report, I would imagine it's got all of the analysis and inspection that was done of the tank and all that information presented in it can be shared with the board.
Absolutely.
Certainly, yes.
Moving right along.
Are there any other questions on the?
That'll do it for now. Thank you.
Great. Then I will pass the presentation along to Kevin Cullen, who will be presenting on solids handling update.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Camille. Good afternoon, Chairman Alvarez and members of the committee and board. I'll be starting on page 47 of the board packet if you'd like to follow along. So today I'll be providing an update on West Basin solids handling process at the Edward C. Little Water Recycling Facility. I'll also highlight some of the studies that have been completed by staff to date and discuss the next steps for the solids handling system. On the right-hand side here, you'll see an aerial view of the Edward C. Little facility. The solids handling system and its equipment can be identified in this general area. So first and foremost, a solids handling system is required to produce recycled water of any kind. Specifically at ECL, the solids handling system supports basically all the treatment chains, that being the barrier water, Chevron, low pressure boiler feed, high pressure boiler feed, and the Title 22 water that serves our irrigation customers as well as the satellite facilities. The solids handling system is operated using a biosolids permit. Actually, our operations manager, Uzi Daniel, gave a great presentation and overview of this permit and the associated hauling contract last month at the F&A committee. So our biosolids permit follows Class A of the EPA Part 503 biosolids rule. And lucky for West Basin, there are a few green alternatives for the solids when they're hauled off. They can be used for either construction materials, landfill cover, or even agricultural reuse. solids handling system at ECL is creeping up there in age. It was installed as part of the original plant construction as it was needed to support the recycled water production process. So it's just over 25 years old now, and has been in continuous operation since it was installed. The system did go under some retrofits in 2007 when the plant was expanded as part of phase 4 construction, and the filter presses were modified to be able to handle a bit more capacity. I'd like to just highlight the individual components that make up the solids handling system. We have our waste EQ basin. Behind it, you can also see the barrier EQ basin. We also have 3 high rate clarifiers. These are supported by 2 gravity thickener units, further supported by our gravity belt thickeners. You might hear me say GBT throughout the presentation. This refers to those gravity belt thickeners. We have 3 of those. They're housed in the GBT building identified there. And we also have 4 conditioning tanks. These conditioning tanks hold our thickened sludge mixed with a lime slurry for our pH compliance to make sure we fall in line with that EPA 503 rule. And finally, we have our dewatering building. The dewatering building, it's 2 levels, some minor equipment acid system on the first floor, as well as the trucking bays for trucks to pull through and receive the solids. And then on the second floor, we have 2 large plate and frame filter presses. So essentially, the barrier EQ backwash basin and the Title 22 backwash EQ basin, they all feed the 3 high rate clarifiers. The 3 clarifiers then allow particulates to settle to the bottom, where they make their way either directly to the GBT units or to the gravity thickeners themselves. The GBTs really provide a extra level of thickening or reduction in water content of the solids at ECL. And it goes from about 1% solid to 6% solid before it gets to the plate and frame. And then the effluent that comes off, whether it's the high rate clarifiers, the gravity thickeners, or the GBTs, that's all recirculated back to the headworks of the plant. So essentially, there's a continuous recycling process at ECL until the sludge can't be thickened anymore. The first study that I'd like to highlight is a feasibility study and condition assessment that was completed. The study included a detailed inspection of all the existing equipment. That included, the sludge feed pumps, those 4 sludge conditioning tanks, commutators, filter press feed pumps, the plate and frame filter presses themselves. There's a compressed to air system that also supports the plate and frame filter presses. There's also an acid wash system, many floor drains and piping, bomb bay doors that help offload the solids into the trucks, as well as the dewatering building structure itself. The next component of the study I wanted to highlight was some bench scale testing for pH compliance. You can achieve that pH compliance using a variety of chemicals. The 3 that we looked at are hydrated lime, lime slurry, and caustic. The district currently uses lime slurry to achieve this compliance. We also looked at 5 proposed alternatives. We looked at what percent solids those might be able to attain for us, as well as the advantages and disadvantages of each system. I'll dive into those a bit later. We also ran a centrifuge pilot test. As part of this study, there was a recommended technology. So the district underwent a 2-week-long pilot study replicating the exact recommended technology on our actual sludge, which ultimately proved to be successful. There was also a construction cost estimate and life cycle cost analysis performed. And finally, a recommendation for a design scope. The consultant listed out exactly what materials would need to be demolished and what would need to be constructed. So some of the conclusions that we were able to draw from this feasibility study, essentially the building, the structure, the plumbing and electrical equipment, they're all in fairly good condition, have about 20 years of life left. However, the majority of the solids handling equipment is now at or has extended beyond its useful life. We're in a bit of a bonus zone on a few pieces of equipment. Secondly, the study confirmed that pH compliance can be achieved using either 3 of the chemicals we tested. As mentioned, we currently use lime slurry. In West Basin's current process and the nature of lime slurry, we have to use a considerable amount of lime slurry. And as you might recall from Uzi's presentation last month, we do pay for the lime slurry to be hauled off as well as any other dry lime or caustic would need to be paid for as part of that total hauling weight. However, in the case of looking at lime slurry, a considerable more amount must be used. So you're paying for that additional chemical to be hauled off. In the case of switching to dry lime, which the recommended technology looked at, there would be some considerable cost savings available to the district. It also recommended, the recommended technology was moving away from our plate and frame presses. It's kind of an outdated technology, and moving into the new age and using centrifuges with a post-lime treatment. This alternative had the lowest construction cost as well as the lowest annualized cost. I'm looking at, power, maintenance, chemicals, things like that. I do recognize some of the information on this slide is pretty small, but I did want to just highlight the life cycle cost analysis of the alternative 4B, which is the recommended technology. And then finally, as mentioned on the previous slide, this recommended technology of using centrifuges and a dry lime post-treatment was proven to be effective on West Basin's exact thickened sludge. Real quick, a closer look at the alternatives the advantages and disadvantages of the recommended alternative. First, with a centrifuge, you have the opportunity for a continuous process. With our plate and frames currently, it's much more of a batch process and puts a little bit more of a weight on operations. Automation is available because it's a continuous process. It's the least costly alternative. It does not require an acid system, so it's a system that could be eliminated and done away with. Also, as mentioned earlier, a considerable amount of reduction in lime due to less water content. The centrifuges would be a little bit more effective, so less chemical would be used, as well as the dry lime, less is needed there as well. I did not highlight it here, but one also thing I'd like to highlight is that those 4 conditioning tanks that are also at the end of the useful life would not be needed if we did move towards this recommended technology. Some of the disadvantages, it is a new system, so we need to provide some training and our operators would need to get used to it, Suez that being. Some minor structural improvements in order to get the equipment up to the 2nd floor. There would be some minor structural improvements. And then finally, with the dry lime post-treatment, you would be adding a dry lime using a shaker over the top of the bomb bay doors. So it would require a bit of a chemical transfer system to get that dry lime up to the 2nd floor. The last study I wanted to highlight as part of our due diligence in analyzing the solids handling system was a potential discharge to the LA County Sanitation District Joint Pollution Plant. Currently, West Basin actually holds an industrial waste discharge permit for the RO and MF clean in place waste. So what we did in this study was we analyzed what it would take to combine the GBT effluent, that's thickened sludge, with our existing permit. So in this case, we really challenged the consultant who we brought online. We used our on-call engineering consultant, and we basically asked them to come up with a blend of what would be the most not only cost-effective but most practical scenario. So some of the items that go into the practicality and cost of an industrial waste discharge permit, by far the biggest parameter is flow. Whether you're looking at regular flow or peak flow, it's measured in gallons per day or gallons per minute. The second biggest parameter is total suspended solids. Similar to turbidity, has some characteristics that are the same, represents some of the solids content in the water, not the same, but does have some similarities. That's the second biggest parameter. And then finally, chemical oxygen demand. This is basically an indicative measure of the amount of oxygen that can be consumed by the reactions that are occurring in this waste stream. So some of these have inversely proportional relationships. For example, flow. If you have more flow, you'll have a lower solids content. Conversely, if you try to bring down the flow and really restrict the amount that you would be sending to the county, the total suspended solid jumps up. So there's a fine tuning and a balancing of the three parameters that's needed. So essentially what we challenged the consultant with was to come up with the most effective blend of the three streams. They looked at a 0.6% solids content, a 1% solids, 2%, 3%, and 6%. The conclusions that came out of that were that the best case scenario was a 0.6 GBT solids discharge blended with the MF and ROCIP waste. As mentioned on the slide before, if you bring down that solids content to the minimum possible, the flow would go up quite considerably. And with that, the calculated fees for looking at adding this to our industrial waste discharge permit would be a connection fee north of $13 million and about $1.5 million per year, so quite expensive. Additionally, the estimated flow, because the flow would be considerably increased, it would push the capacity of the El Segundo trunk line, so there would be further studies needed if we were to really evaluate this further. And ultimately, the conclusion from our consultant was that based on these conditions, the blending project does not seem feasible or cost effective in comparison to the capital project. So looking at the cost estimate, the total capital project, including some inflation as the study was completed just over a year ago, and we've seen some inflation, is about $11.9 million. That relates into an annualized cost over a 15-year loan of about $1.97 million. The annualized O&M costs, with bringing down our hauling costs considerably, would be at about $1.6 million for an annualized total of about $3.6 million. And just a side note here, based on the amount of maintenance and O&M that goes into the aging facility currently, between electricity, chemicals, maintenance, etc., labor, repairs, it's currently costing the district about $3.5 to $4 million per year. So looking forward, following the recommendation of our consultants, we'll be looking to complete an RFP for engineering design services next month. The RFP has begun to be drafted now. We've got the scope of work, but just need to put together the body of the RFP. So planning for a 2 to 3 month solicitation of that RFP, we'd begin the design phase in the fall, November 2021. Design phase would last about 9 months, be completed in summer 2022. And following the completion of the design, we would go out for construction bids in August of 2022. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions.
Anyone have any questions? Kevin, on the feasibility study part, who was the consultant that did that work?
That was AKM Consulting Engineers on the design side. That was done under, I believe, our 2016 on-call agreement, which was a 3-year agreement. I think it was initiated in 2019.
Okay, and then you had somebody else look at a direct discharge to the LA County Sand District? Or that was AKM?
Correct. No, that was not AKM. We used Hazen and Sawyer as part of our 2019 on-call engineering services agreement.
Oh, okay.
And both were competitive solicitations within the on-call group.
Right. In terms of the cost, you did say that the recommendations is that it's going to be slightly cheaper to go with the physical upgrades versus going to direct discharge to the sand district. Just looking at your two costs, though, the connection fee was the big one. That's a $13.1 million, and then the annual O&M, or the annual discharge fee based on the combination of flow and waste characteristics, $1.5 million. The O&M costs for the physical plants a little bit more, and the total capital cost is 11,961,000. So it doesn't look like it's that much different, although the direct discharge is a little bit more because the capital cost drives it up. Have you guys gone back and talked to LA County sand districts and tried to work out? It's not the easiest thing in the world, I understand that, but talk to them about the initial connection fee cost. And then, okay, so that'd be one question, and maybe you haven't done it, you might want to think about that. The next one is on the total capital cost. Is that just construction costs?
On your first question, we have been engaged with the representative from the county throughout the process. They provided, for all customers, they have strict equations. So you basically plug in your values for flow, TSS, and chemical oxygen demand. And it's based on set parameters. They increase their rates every year. So we haven't engaged about lowering costs. That is something on the table. On the second part, the capital cost does include engineering and construction management costs as well.
Okay.
And if I could add, the one cost that is not captured in exploring a potential discharge to the sewer is an actual facility to discharge into the sewer. So there would be an additional capital project needed there, as well as I mentioned, additional studies on the sewer capacity.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Another question, given kind of the state of flux that some things are in, what happens if we don't do this for a year?
Well,
you don't need to answer that.
Simply put, it's an aging system. There's very few people in the world who work on these plate and frame presses. So it would definitely keep our operations team up at night. I could say that. But yeah, apart from that, it's just an aging system. The repair costs will continue to go up. Things will continue to degrade. Yeah, that's about it.
And if I may add, Director Alvarez, we have Lorenzo with us, the plant manager. He could chime in on this as well. Yeah, I mean, the life cycle of such equipment, again, 15 to 20 years. It's been around 25 right now. And one of the reasons why we also wanted to do that study to the county was, and we were really excited about that study, was again to see if do we truly need all these facilities. We really need to kind of vet that. And so we went through the process. We chose to kind of take some time to do that. Now, with the current loadings, with the current water quality that we're seeing, it's coming above the physical project, right? Slightly above the physical project. If we were to one day receive MBR water, let's say MBR is going to be available in 2035 or 2040 or somewhere in between or somewhere in that range, perhaps the county connection makes more sense, right? The loadings are much less, and in that way we could have maybe we won't need these facilities. But we have 15 to 20 years to go, and we certainly can't rely on the facilities that are there today to go that long. And so we think we have 15 to 20 years. We need facility. We need solids handling. We need to do something about it pretty soon. And therefore, this project is one of the highest priorities. But we did choose to take the time to do that analysis.
Okay, so the solids handling is an important component, and this is one of those systems that's really, for lack of a better word, antiquated. So I'm just thinking that we might want to step back and take a bigger picture. We have other issues, underlying issues that are going to be affecting the Ed C. Little plant. And to continue to make investments in there, we have to be very, very cautious. So I guess I'm not as anxious to get this RFP out until there's some other issues that we've addressed. And I see the need if we're going to stay with this approach. And whether we go with MBR on our own or we go with MBR with the city of LA, those are two different options. One may be able to be executed a little bit faster than the other, and it overall looks at the overall treatment scheme a little bit more holistically. So my ask, I guess, is that we think about this and not rush into the design, because whether we do it in 3 months or 6 months, we have that time frame. We don't have a 10-year time frame. I agree with that.
If we can at least get the RFPs out so we don't lose time, and if there are issues that we think that we could resolve in the next 3 to 6 months, that way maybe perhaps we won't lose time. But this is something that we haven't rushed on, and the feasibility study has been out there for 2-3 years now. We did, or a couple of years, we did perform the extra analysis to look into the study, and it's just I think again, it is something that keeps our operators up at night. This particular facility, because it is a single point of failure, we need the solids handling for ECL, but not only ECL, but everything upstream of that, downstream of that, satellite plants, all of it really. And so it would be a risk to, take some time not doing this. And we chose to take a little bit of risk by kind of doing this study to the county. It's about how much longer do we want to take the risk of not proceeding with this from here on.
Yes, but I still think that we have some underlying issues that need to be addressed, and delaying this for 6 months is not going to make that big of a difference.
Okay, so you're asking us to delay it for 6 months. Okay.
Director,
if I can.
Director Alvarez, if I could clarify, so you're asking for 6 months.
You can proceed and write the RFP. I just don't want to issue the RFP until we have some underlying issues that need to be addressed.
How much, Mr. Chair, what is the cost of the RFP? The
design services?
Yes. What is the cost of that?
I think we estimated, correct, Kevin, do you have that tip of your hand? I think it was around $1 million.
The cost of issuing an RFP would be zero. But the engineering component that we've budgeted for, we've budgeted just north of $1 million for engineering design, but that would not come till a contract is executed.
That's what I'm getting at. It's not, I mean, of course, just mailing the thing out, zero, but it goes into developing the RFP and what you want at the end of it. There is the cost of that. So if we wait 6 months, because we're not going to do the RFP and then let the work, right?
That's correct. We wouldn't even have I shouldn't say wouldn't even, but if we proceeded with a design, which would complete, summer 2022, you'd still be looking at 2023 before a new system was brought online.
And possibly longer.
What is the, well, there's a lot going on, a lot of unknowns out there now about what's happening at LA with the people who are leaving and have left LA, And then the big key person, the big leadership issue, because we know that big engineering decisions are not made by engineers. They're made by the businessman. And in the public sector, the businessman is the mayor, for example, in the city of LA, who controls a lot. So we know that are these the unknowns that you're concerned about, Director Alvarez, or is there something else?
No, it's the regional issues that we need to understand exactly where we're going to be at, and I don't think it's worth right now committing to the RFP and issuing it. Based on just the cost of it, I figured it's going to be about $1 million+ for design services. That would be pretty standard. That's just that in itself is a significant amount of change to spend. And what I don't like to do is issue an RFP, have people write proposals, and a proposal like this it's not the most difficult proposal to do, but it's something that takes time and so on. And then at the end of the day, say, we're not going to do that. Some other issues have come up, and we need to pivot. So I don't see any harm. I understand the facilities. I understand the process. I wish we didn't have that kind of a process, to be very honest with you, but I understand it. I also know that whether it's done now or 6 months from now, when we have a better understanding of our overall position, it's not going to make that big of a difference.
Okay. So the engineering, you're saying that the engineering work is not that big a deal, that we could do it now or later, it wouldn't be detrimental to us.
No, if the engineering work shouldn't have to be done if we do this, but whether we do it now or we wait 6 months to make that decision, and we have a better picture of some of the other issues that we need to face, isn't going to make a difference in the big scheme of things.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you.
I will just, whatever the issues that we're trying to resolve within 6 months, I think we should, just a recommendation and a suggestion to think whether that's going to make a difference of whether we construct this solids facility and whether we want to take the risk of delaying the process. So if the request of the board is to write the RFP, get it ready, and hold for a little while, then I just want to make clear that there's risk associated with that on a facility that has a single point of failure and one that is causing headaches for our operations. So I just want to be clear with that.
We understand, and you could have a headache tomorrow. It could happen tomorrow.
You're not asking us to spend money.
It's not going to be my personal headache. It's going to be a headache of the district if there's failures with the solids handling facility. Yeah.
But today, you're not asking for us to take action. You're giving us information, and you'll be coming back to ask for action.
We could prepare the RFP and bring it back as an action, whether you want us to issue the RFP or hold further. That's an option.
Well, actually, if we look at the item, the last page that Kevin presented, it was issue the RFP, begin the design in November. So that would be bring on the consultant in November, finalize the design and bid documents next year, and issue basically requests for bids or notice inviting bids August of next year. So although it's an information item, the way it's being presented, they're moving forward with these steps.
Right, and that's why we bring these subjects to the CIP information items to give heads up on some of the next steps that we're doing. But if there's a request by the board or the committee to hold off on some of these, then I don't know, EJ, how you feel about it. If we should bring it back as an action item, or.
Well, I think Barkev, thank you for your input, and I think that it's important to really note that although this does provide a timeline of events, there are key points in which staff would need to come to the board, obviously, for action items. For instance, while, as Kevin mentioned, there is zero cost associated with releasing the RFP and, of course, receiving those proposals. Prior to entering into any agreement with any of those proponents of a proposal, we would need to come back to the board, obviously, for action before we could begin the design phase. So just right there, you have a key aspect where it would be coming back to the board. As Barkev mentioned, I apologize, but I've got a couple of different notes here. As Barkev mentioned, I'm not exactly sure that any of the key issues or regional issues will be wrapped up within a 6-month period. However, Chairman Alvarez, if you'd like, what we could do is continue to draft the RFP, bring it back at least for the directors to see, so we can put out the draft as we did actually with the testing RFP, and that would actually allow us to kind of continue to move forward without taking any specific action, and that would actually provide myself a little bit of time to maybe discuss those regional issues with you, to talk about kind of how those might move forward and where we are with those. So I think we would need a little bit of time to maybe address some of your concerns, but if staff is in the process now of developing the RFP, perhaps we could complete that draft so that we're ready if of course, it's okay with the board to release.
EJ, I think I mentioned, I don't have a problem with moving forward the RFP. I think Kevin's probably going to be the one preparing it. He does an excellent job. Just my whole concern is we issue the RFP, we receive the proposals, and then you're going to award a contract. You'd be bringing that back to the board. If the board pivots at that point, these firms that write these proposals incur a lot of costs, and that may or may not be something that was necessary. So you prepare the RFP, and maybe what we ought to do is when the RFP is done, bring it back to the E&O committee, and we can discuss it a little bit further. We have a little better indication of some of the other issues that we need to deal with, and try to figure out what might be the better way to go here. And in the meantime, I do think that you guys ought to, I understand the formulas. Trust me, I've had to live with them, and just the way LA County Sand District works. But I also know that at some points you can talk to them, and there are some things that they can give on. Not the easiest thing to do.
Well, right now, staff is not asking us to spend any money. Is that correct? Okay, so then you can continue to work forward on developing the scope of work for the RFP, but you already know what that is, right? Is that true? Hello?
Yeah, they need to put it together. There's work in putting together the RFP, even though they might be scope of work. It's still a lot of work to go from, here's my outline for what I need to get a full RFP issue.
So
that takes work.
So what will be the negative impact on the district for developing the RFP now?
As I said earlier, I don't see a problem with developing the RFP now and bringing it back. I just didn't, my concern is issuing the RFP, having firms incur the cost, and then bringing the item up to the board for award of a design contract.
Well,
we can do that.
That still, you can issue the RFP, but you're not they're not asking to spend money. until it comes back and ask you to make an award, then that's when you're spending the money. Is that right? Okay.
That's correct. But you know that for the firms writing the proposals, that's quite a bit of work. And then we're faced with the possibility of then maybe saying we're not going to award the contract at this time, and that's and people get rightfully upset that, well, if that was the case, why go through this? So I don't have a problem with doing as I said earlier, draft the RFP and let's bring it back to the committee. We'll have a better indication of where things are.
Yeah. But Director Alvarez, firms, consulting firms, construction firms, always complain about how much money they spent to prepare or submit a bid when they don't get it.
Absolutely.
So I mean, that's the cost of doing business. Now, when I was started off in this business, I was told that it would take 10 to get one. So I mean, you expect that you're not going to get them all the time, so you have to work for it. So to me, I think we have to look out for us and not for the consultants who are out there submitting. They're going to get theirs. May not be us, but it'll be the next public agency out there. So I think we should go as far as we can before we have to spend any money.
This is Director Houston. Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
No, I really find a very interesting conversation, and I mean, for what it's worth, I think while we're having this dialogue, it pretty well was presented to us that this is, a plan and this is the timeline. I think the best probably at this moment is to, have staff probably start working on the RFP internally, but let's make sure that we're ready to bring that to the board for any kind of action before it gets on an agenda, because I see two things here. One is once it's on an agenda, even to take action of, do you guys give us a blessing to go out to bid on this, or, to release it, it makes us have to make a decision on the spot. I think that this committee ought to make sure it's ready for prime time before it gets on an agenda. That's just my first thought. My second thought is, and unfortunately this is what happened with the Culver City project or the Kenneth Hahn project, was it had gone out to bid and had all these different folks who had gone through that process, and ultimately we did not move forward. So, I would rather not have people go through these exercises until West Basin's confident that we'd like to go out to an RFP on something. So I think, again, staff ought to start the process internally and then continue working with the committee. But my caution would be, and this would be to the committee and the general manager, is please don't put it on an agenda until we're really serious about having that conversation. I would not want to see it that way. And then one last thought on this is, I think we have a lot of ambiguity at the same time. And don't get me wrong, staff, I do understand there's a need here on that facility, but I think the next item is talking more about the recycled water master plan, which we still haven't really gone through thoroughly as a board. And so it seems like, yes, even in the next 3 months or so, we do need to have a better understanding of some issues of the future direction of the district and the Ed C. Little facilities. So I do think that there is a reason for some of that caution rather than jumping to put out RFPs on stuff when we really don't 100% know what's the long-term plan for the Ed C. Little facility. So that's what I'm thinking. And again, I don't even know what we're going to talk about in the next section, okay? But we haven't really gotten a firm understanding of strategic planning. So I'm just really cautious about running and authorizing a project until I understand some long-term thinking.
Okay, any other comments?
Yeah, Director Alvarez, Chair Alvarez is great.
Yes, Director Gray, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, the only thing I want to say, there's been a lot of discussions, but I do believe we should just let staff internally develop a draft RFP. It's got to come before your committee, so I don't see any harm in doing that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, if not, EJ, I think you have direction that, go ahead and proceed with developing the RFP and then bring it back for consideration before we move forward.
Will do, Chairman Alvarez.
Okay, so is that it for the capital improvement program update?
Yes, that is. Thank you, Chairman.
All right. So then next item up is the recycled water master plan. And I do want to say that it's almost 6 p.m. I really didn't think this meeting was going to be that long, to be honest. I don't know if we can go through this entire presentation, and I don't know what my fellow committee member and the other board members would want to do if they want the full presentation, because I have a feeling that if we go through this whole thing, we'll be here for at least another hour, and by that time it's going to be 7 o'clock.
And at the chairman's discretion, we've utilized special workshops before. I know that we have one related to the cost benefit analysis on our ocean water desalination program coming up in early August. As Director Houston mentioned, the recycled water master plan update is a crucial part of our future when it comes to recycled water. A great deal of time and effort has been put into it, not only by our consultants, but of course, the West Basin staff members that contributed to it. So if you'd like, if it's the direction of the committee, we could bring that back for perhaps a special workshop to kind of get into some of those details. If not, staff is prepared to kind of quickly move through it. But as you mentioned, there's quite a bit in there, and there are certain points and certain issues that additional details needed.
Mr. Chair.
So first, let me go to Director Williams. What's your pleasure? Do you want to maybe have a very succinct presentation this evening, or that we bring this back and possibly, given the way the master plan is set up, and I'm throwing this out, but one of the things is you almost have to look at it component by component. And there are some key components in the master plan that I don't think we've spoken to as much as some other areas. And so it might behoove us to have the workshop approach. But Director Williams, what's your feelings on this one?
I support the workshop approach because, we, for the past, 25 years, we've been touting our unique recycled water program. And I think we need to spend as much time as possible to make it as unique and exciting and that for us as we can. Because without the recycled water program, we're just a paper organization. So I think we need to spend as much time as we can on our recycled water program.
Okay, any other board member comments on this?
I would just say I agree. I agree with that, Director Williams.
So maybe we'll bring this back through a series of workshops, EJ, if that's okay. And for today, very much appreciate staff's time and preparation of the presentation materials that was put together. And I know there's an awful lot of effort in that. But we'll take it in future workshops. So the effort is not in vain. You get to polish it up now.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Alvarez, and I will work with you as the chair to identify those components, and we can identify how many potential workshop meetings would be required. We'll work with our manager of administration here to schedule those workshops in the near future.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, then there's no other information calendar items. There's no closed session that I'm aware of. Director comments and future agenda items. So Director Williams,
No, thank you.
you have none. Director Houston, do you have any?
Sure, just a closing comment, and I do want to thank you, staff, for the update on the Hyperion plant situation. I did speak with our acting general manager about this earlier today, because even myself as a resident of El Segundo, most of our community does not get informed until the Monday evening after the event happened, as well as Manhattan Beach up to Playa del Rey. So it'll be interesting to see what their investigation results in and what happened and why, but there was a huge lack of communication, it seems, across the board, not just to us as an agency relying on their water, but then also to the communities that surround the plant. And so certainly Supervisor Janice Hahn has been very forthright on this, as well as they passed a resolution 2 days ago on the spot at the Board of Supervisors asking, I think, for a 7-day turn time report, what happened between LA SAN and also the Department of County Public Department of Health. But anyways, I just wanted to mention it because hopefully there will be a lot of lessons learned, and public agencies, we all just have to understand that when things happen, we need to be as quick and immediate out there and be factual. Because there's been different scenarios too. Unfortunately, it's been a rumor mill. So between the people on Facebook and next door, and just talking to people out in the community or down by the beach, there's all manner of theories of what happened. But more importantly, people are really upset because the water was dirty and contaminated, and apparently people were swimming in it on Monday morning. So anyways, staff, please keep us posted. But also, I think our team should always look at that too, is what if these things happen in any of our facilities? We should be ready to go right away and just be proactive rather than reactive. So anyways, I just wanted to make that comment, and I do appreciate it. And thank you for these meetings, and look forward to the workshops on that recycle water plan.
Thank you. Director Gray, do you have any comments?
My only comments, I want to thank all the staff for the presentations today and their work, and also our acting GM or interim GM. Thank you.
And Director Deere?
No, I have no comments. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. There's a big echo. Okay. I do want to talk about one thing, and I think it's very much in at least a lot of people that I talk to, mostly because they see me, they think water, and they think about the drought. And we are in a drought. And I think, and I've been through several droughts, as most of you have been, and I know all of the staff is very familiar with California water and how we have dry years and wet years, and sometimes we have much drier years and other times, etc. But I think when we look at the situation today, we're looking at something much more serious. And I'm really kind of very, very surprised at the Colorado River. You look at the water levels there, they're going to drop below the critical point, a point that I don't think anybody 20, 30 years ago ever thought was going to be reached. But that's kind of where it is. And I'm not quite sure that there's going to be a recovery in the near future, given what we're seeing in terms of climate patterns and changes in just hydrology. And it's hard to tell exactly where you are when your population sampling is changing before you, but the changes only give you a few points in that population sample, so it's very hard to analyze it. But when you do look at things like our reservoir situation, I was looking at, I know I'm kind of a nerd, I do look at state water reservoirs every day in terms of the water levels there. And Oroville today is at 23% of capacity. That's, I mean, really low. At some point, it's probably going to impact it's already impacting its ability to produce energy. And people forget that one of the biggest things that happens at Oroville, as well as Hoover Dam, is the production of hydropower. But that's reliant on having water. And if the water levels are way down, even though you may still have the same flows, you're still going to be producing at a lower rate. So I think that we are looking at a different type of climatic situation, that this drought is more serious than some of the droughts that we have seen in the past in terms of the ability of the region to recover, and that it would be worthwhile to, I don't want to be an alarmist, but I do think that we do need to take a more active approach to engaging our community that we serve, to start getting active participation beyond, like I said, the people are awareness, but to start actively looking at water conservation. And we all ought to pat ourselves on the back. California today on a per capita basis consumes a lot less water than it did 20 years ago and 30 years ago. And so we've made great strides. And on the individual level, there's probably some additional strides that can be made, but not that much. When we look at the overall water consumption, you know, we do live in an arid region, but we have an awful lot of lawns and very lush landscaping. That's going to be one of those areas that I think is going to have to morph into the future. But where I'm heading and what I'd like to do is to have on the agenda for this board meeting is an action on initiating the water shortage contingency plan, which would be a first step. It's not draconian, but it will get everybody thinking about things and start making some movements in the water conservation area that I think that all of Southern California needs to start doing. I know that it's not coming to mind right now, but either Callejas or Las Virgenes, I forget which one of those has already initiated their water shortage contingency plan. And I think that a lot of the thought process behind doing so is some of the reasoning that I've just articulated. So I would like to have this item brought to the board for action of initializing the water shortage contingency plan at the July board meeting.
Chairman Alvarez, just to clarify, were you asking us to bring that back through the E&O committee? That's what I understood you to say, but then you mentioned the July board meeting. So
No, I misspoke. I think that at the E&O committee, we don't need to discuss it. I mean, I can be corrected on that, but what I'd like to do is have it put on the board agenda for action on the July board meeting.
I would concur with that. And we do not need to take it to the E&O committee because we're here now. But we've been talking about water conservation since the drought in the 90s. So this is nothing new. And I think the last drought, the major one that we had, that Brown declared, that was a powerful one there. And we know where we are. And the water situation for us is not going to get any better. Now, I've been hearing, again, since I got on the board, that Lake Mead will never be full again, and that when we look at Oroville, I never in my wildest dreams would have thought that Oroville would be looking like it looks now. So yeah, we need to get cracking like right now, and because we've been saying it all along, but we got to get really on it. So I agree with you, Director Alvarez.
Okay, any other comments? All right, with that, I think that the day has gotten long, and time to adjourn. Thank you, everyone, for all of your work. Really appreciate it, and we've had some very good discussions today.